My name is Alexandra Lexi Bennett, and I'm 28 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm about to tell you a story that's going to sound insane. Literally. Because for 6 months of my life, I was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital. Not because I was mentally ill, but because my husband convinced everyone, including doctors, my family, and the legal system, that I was. Before I tell you how that happened, you need to understand where I came from. Because the reason I ended up married to a man who would do that to me starts long before I ever met him. I grew up in a small town outside of Columbia, South Carolina. My family was complicated. My mom, Patricia, got pregnant with me when she was 17. My biological father bailed before I was even born. My mom dropped out of high school, worked 2 jobs, and raised me in a tiny apartment that always smelled like cigarette smoke and desperation. When I was 5, my mom married Frank. He wasn't a bad guy, exactly. He worked construction, provided for us, gave me his last name. But he also made it very clear that I wasn't really his kid. That he was doing my mom a favor by taking us in. That I should be grateful. Growing up, I absorbed this message. Women in my family struggled. We got pregnant young, we made bad choices. We depended on men who reminded us constantly that we were lucky they stuck around. My mom's entire identity was wrapped up in keeping Frank happy. She cooked what he liked, watched what he wanted to watch, never disagreed with him in public. And she taught me, without ever saying it directly, that this was what women did. We made ourselves small. We were grateful. We didn't cause problems. I was determined to be different. I was going to finish high school, go to college, build a career, never be dependent on anyone. And I did finish high school, with honors. I got a scholarship to the College of Charleston to study marketing. I moved to the city, got a part-time job at a boutique, and felt like I was finally building the life I wanted. That's when I met Preston Whitmore. I was 21, working at the boutique in the historic district. Preston walked in one day looking for a gift for his mother. He was 29, tall, handsome, impeccably dressed. He drove a BMW. He had this confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. We talked while I helped him pick out a scarf. He was charming, funny, interested in my life, my studies, my dreams. Before he left, he asked for my number. And like an idiot, I gave it to him. Preston came from the kind of Charleston family that has streets named after them. Old money. His grandfather had been a state senator. His father owned a successful law firm. They lived in a historic mansion in the Battery with a view of the harbor. Preston himself was a corporate attorney at his father's firm. When he started pursuing me, I was flattered. Overwhelmed. A guy like Preston Whitmore doesn't normally date girls from small towns who work retail to pay for college. But he acted like I was the most interesting person he'd ever met. He took me to expensive restaurants, bought me gifts, introduced me to his world. Looking back, I can see the red flags. The way he'd make decisions without asking me. Where we'd eat, what we'd do, who we'd see. The way he'd gently correct me in social situations. It's pronounced bruschetta, not bruschetta, sweetheart. The way he'd comment on my clothes, my makeup, my hair, always with this tone that suggested he was helping me improve. But at 21, I didn't see those things as red flags. I saw them as Preston teaching me how to navigate his world. I saw them as him investing in me, wanting me to fit in with his family and friends. I was so grateful that someone like him wanted me that I ignored the little voice in my head that said something was off. We dated for a year and a half. During that time, Preston systematically separated me from my old life. He didn't like my college friends, said they were trashy and beneath me now. He didn't want me working at the boutique, said it was embarrassing for his girlfriend to be in retail. He even started making comments about my mom and Frank, said they were toxic, and I should create some distance. So I did. I quit my job. I drifted away from my friends. I saw my family less and less. And I became completely dependent on Preston, financially, socially, emotionally. When Preston proposed, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was huge, 300 guests, held at a historic plantation venue, covered by the local society pages. My mom cried, but I couldn't tell if they were happy tears or worried tears. Frank told me I was marrying up, and I should not screw this up. Nobody asked if I was happy. Nobody asked if Preston treated me well. Everyone just seemed relieved that I was securing my future with a good man from a good family. We got married when I was 23. Preston was 31. And almost immediately, things changed. The Preston I dated, charming, attentive, generous, disappeared. In his place was someone cold, critical, controlling. He didn't want me to work. He said I should focus on being a wife and running the household. He gave me a credit card with a monthly limit and told me to manage it responsibly. He expected me to attend his work functions, entertain his colleagues, always look perfect, always say the right thing. But when we were alone, he was cruel. He'd criticize everything about me. My clothes were wrong. My makeup was too much or not enough. I was too loud, too quiet, too something. Every day there was something wrong with me. "You're so lucky I married you," he'd say. "Nobody else would put up with this. You know what your problem is? You think you're smarter than you actually are. God, you're embarrassing sometimes. Do you even think before you speak?" The worst part was how he'd do it. Calmly. Almost kindly. Like he was trying to help me be better. And then he'd hug me, kiss my forehead, and say, "I only say these things because I love you. I want you to be the best version of yourself." I started to believe him. Started to think that maybe I was the problem. That maybe I was lucky he'd married me despite my flaws. About 6 months into our marriage, Preston started doing something that confused me. He'd tell me plans, then later claim he never said them. He'd move my things, then act baffled when I couldn't find them. He'd tell his family I'd said things I definitely hadn't said. "Preston told us you're not feeling well," his mother said to me at a family dinner. "He said you've been having headaches and memory problems." What? "No, I'm fine," I said, looking at Preston in confusion. The first 72 hours in Riverside were the worst of my entire life. I was put in a shared room with another woman who kept screaming about demons. I wasn't allowed to have my phone. I wasn't allowed to leave. I had to attend group therapy sessions where people discussed their schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and suicide attempts. I had to take medication, different medication than what Dr. Morrison had prescribed, that made me feel even more disconnected from reality. And every time I tried to tell someone I didn't belong there, that my husband had manipulated the situation, I was told I was in denial. That lack of insight into my condition was a symptom of my mental illness. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband is very concerned about you," said Dr. Sarah Jennings, the psychiatrist assigned to my case. "He says you've been having delusions, that you believe people are conspiring against you." "Because they are," I said. "My husband gaslit me for 2 years to make everyone think I was crazy so he could have me committed." "Do you hear yourself?" Dr. Jennings said gently. "That's a paranoid delusion. No one is conspiring against you. Your husband loves you and wants you to get better." "He doesn't love me. He's controlling and abusive, and this is the ultimate form of control." "Mrs. Whitmore, the more you insist on this narrative, the longer you're going to be here. If you want to go home, you need to accept that you have a mental health condition and work on treatment." I realized with horror that I was trapped in a catch-22. If I insisted I was sane, they said I was delusional and lacked insight. If I admitted I was mentally ill, they'd keep me medicated and under observation. There was no way to win. Preston visited on the 3rd day. He came with flowers, with this concerned expression, playing the devoted husband. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked. I wanted to scream at him, to attack him, to make him admit what he'd done. But I knew if I did any of those things, It would just confirm everyone's belief that I was violent and unstable. So I said calmly, "Why did you do this to me?" "I did it because I love you," he said. "Because you need help and you weren't getting it on your own." "I don't need help. You've been manipulating everyone to think I'm crazy." He sighed like I was a child who wasn't understanding. "Lexi, this is exactly what Dr. Jennings is talking about. You're paranoid. You think I'm manipulating people. But I'm just trying to get you the care you need." "How long are you going to keep me here?" "As long as it takes," he said. "The commitment order is for 30 days. After that, we'll see if you're ready to come home." 30 days. A month in this place. I felt like I might actually go insane if I stayed here that long. After Preston left, I sat in the day room, trying to think. I needed to get out of here. But how? I couldn't convince the doctors I was sane. I couldn't convince anyone that Preston was lying. I had no access to the outside world except through monitored phone calls and supervised visits. That's when I met Shanice. Shanice was a nurse at Riverside. She was maybe 40 years old, originally from Atlanta, and she had this way of really looking at patients like we were people, not just diagnoses. One night when she was doing rounds, she found me crying in my room. "What's going on, honey?" she asked, sitting down on my bed. "I don't belong here," I said for the 100th time. "My husband is lying about me being mentally ill. He's been gaslighting me for years, and this is his way of controlling me." I expected her to give me the same response everyone else did. But instead, she looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Tell me about your husband." So I did. I told her everything. The way he'd isolated me. The way he'd started making me doubt my own memory. The way he'd gotten me medicated. The way he'd built a case over 2 years to make this commitment possible. Shanice listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I believe you." I started crying again, but this time from relief. Someone believed me. "I've seen this before," Shanice said. "Not often, but it happens. Men who use the psychiatric system as a tool of abuse. It's hard to prove because they're so careful. They build a paper trail. They make themselves look like concerned spouses. And the victim looks irrational because they're rightfully upset about what's being done to them." "Can you help me?" I asked. "I can't get you out of here," she said. "I don't have that authority. But I can document what you're telling me. I can note in your chart that I observe no signs of psychosis, delusions, or other severe mental illness. I can recommend that you be evaluated by an independent psychiatrist, not someone your husband chose. And I can give you advice on how to navigate this system." "What advice?" "Stop insisting you're not mentally ill," she said. "I know it feels like giving in. But the more you fight, the more they'll see you as lacking insight. Instead, tell them you're starting to understand that you've been under a lot of stress. That the medication is helping. That you're grateful for the care. Play the game. Get released. And then once you're out, you divorce him and you get your life back." It went against every instinct I had. But I also knew she was right. I wasn't getting out of here by telling the truth. I was only getting out by playing along. So that's what I did. In my sessions with Dr. Jennings, I started saying things like, "I think I've been under more stress than I realized. And the medication does seem to be helping me think more clearly. And I'm grateful Preston got me the help I needed." It made me sick to say these things. But it worked. Dr. Jennings started noting improvement in insight and better reality testing. After 2 weeks, I was moved from the acute unit to the less restrictive continued care unit. After 3 weeks, I was allowed supervised outings. After 26 days, I was released. Preston picked me up from Riverside with that same concerned expression. He'd brought me flowers. He held my hand in the car. He told me how proud he was that I'd done the work and gotten better. When we got home, he sat me down and laid out the rules. I was to continue seeing Dr. Morrison twice a week. I was to take my medication without question. I was to avoid stressful situations. I was not to drink alcohol. I was not to drive. I was not to contact my family without his supervision because they stressed me out. I was basically on house arrest, monitored by my husband. If you follow these rules, Preston said, you'll stay healthy. But if you start acting erratic again, I'll have no choice but to have you recommitted. And next time, it won't be a 30-day evaluation. It'll be long-term treatment. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. He'd found the perfect way to control me. The threat of hospitalization hung over every moment of every day. If I disagreed with him, I was getting agitated. If I questioned him, I was being irrational. If I didn't smile and play the role of grateful, recovering wife, I was relapsing. But here's what Preston didn't know. Being in Riverside, as horrible as it was, had given me clarity. Being away from him for 26 days had reminded me who I was before him. And Shanice had given me something crucial, a plan. I was going to document everything. I was going to secretly contact a divorce attorney. I was going to build my own case. And I was going to get out. It took me 2 months to find the right moment. Preston had left his laptop open one day when he went to take a shower. I quickly opened his email and started looking. What I found made me feel sick and vindicated at the same time. There were emails to Dr. Morrison from before I'd ever started seeing him. Preston had contacted him first, told him I had a history of instability, I didn't. That my family had mental health issues, they didn't. That he was concerned about my welfare. He'd primed Dr. Morrison to see me as unstable before I ever walked into his office. There were emails to his parents detailing my episodes, carefully constructed descriptions of normal behavior that he framed as concerning. Lexi forgot where she put her purse today. Lexi got emotional when I gently corrected her at dinner. Lexi seems confused about plans we made. There was even an email to his lawyer, dated 6 months before he had me committed, asking about the process for involuntary psychiatric commitment in South Carolina. This had been planned. Premeditated. I took photos of everything with my phone. The phone Preston didn't know I'd managed to get turned back on by memorizing our bank account number and paying the bill online at the library during one of my supervised outings. I also found something else. Evidence that Preston had been having an affair. For at least a year before he had me committed, he'd been seeing someone named Valerie Chen. The emails between them were flirty, intimate, planning meetups. And in one email, Preston had written, "Once I deal with the Lexi situation, we can be together properly. I promise this will be over soon." The Lexi situation. That's what I was to him. A problem to be dealt with. And having me declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized was his solution. I sent all the photos to a private email account I'd created at the library. Then I cleared the browser history on his laptop and put everything back exactly as it had been. The next week, during one of my supervised outings to the library, I used their computer to contact a divorce attorney named Linda Rothstein who specialized in cases involving domestic abuse. I couldn't meet with her in person. Preston monitored everywhere I went. But I emailed her everything. The emails. The timeline. My account of what happened. I told her I needed help getting out, but I couldn't let Preston know I was planning to leave. Linda responded within hours. "What you're describing is a form of domestic abuse called institutional abuse. Your husband used the psychiatric system as a weapon against you. I can help you, but you need to be very careful. If he finds out you're planning to leave, he could have you recommitted before you can file for divorce. Here's what we're going to do." Linda's plan was risky but necessary. For the next 3 months, I had to continue playing the role of the grateful, recovering wife while secretly building my case for divorce. The first thing Linda had me do was get an independent psychiatric evaluation. But I couldn't just go to another psychiatrist. Preston monitored everything. Instead, Linda arranged for me to be accidentally evaluated during what was supposed to be a routine medical appointment. She connected me with Dr. Patricia Alvarez, a psychiatrist who volunteered at a women's clinic in North Charleston. During one of my supervised outings, I told Preston I needed to go to the clinic for a regular checkup. He agreed. It seemed innocent enough. At the clinic, I saw Dr. Alvarez. She spent 2 hours with me, doing a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. She reviewed my records from Riverside. She looked at the medications I'd been prescribed. She asked detailed questions about my marriage, my hospitalization, and my current situation. At the end of the evaluation, Dr. Alvarez gave me a letter. "This is my professional opinion," she said. "You show no signs of mental illness. No psychosis, no delusions, no mood disorder. What you do show signs of is being a victim of long-term psychological abuse and gaslighting. The diagnosis of adjustment disorder that Dr. Morrison gave you was inappropriate and appears to have been influenced by your husband's narrative rather than based on your actual presentation." I wanted to cry with relief. Finally, a professional validating what I'd been saying all along. "Can you testify to this if I get divorced?" I asked. "Absolutely," she said. "And I'll do it pro bono. What your husband did to you is unconscionable. He weaponized the psychiatric system, and that makes me furious both as a doctor and as a human being." Armed with Dr. Alvarez's evaluation, Linda started building the legal case. She subpoenaed Preston's emails. She got copies of the records from Riverside. She interviewed Shanice, who was willing to testify about what she'd observed during my stay and how my presentation didn't match the diagnosis I'd been given. Linda also connected me with a domestic abuse advocate named Teresa who specialized in cases of psychological abuse. Teresa explained to me that what Preston had done had a name: institutionalization as abuse. "It's rare, but it happens," Teresa said. "Usually with wealthy men who have resources and credibility. They use the psychiatric system to control their partners. They isolate them, gaslight them, then have them committed. It gives them complete control and makes the victim look unreliable if they try to speak up." Teresa helped me document everything. She taught me to keep a journal hidden in the bathroom, writing down incidents where Preston was controlling or threatening. She taught me to secretly record conversations on my phone. South Carolina is a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record conversations I was part of without telling the other person. I recorded Preston threatening to have me recommitted if I didn't behave. I recorded him admitting he'd had me hospitalized because I was becoming too independent. I recorded him talking to his father about how the hospitalization had put her in her place. Every piece of evidence I gathered went to Linda. And slowly, carefully, she built a case. But we had to be strategic about timing. If I filed for divorce too soon, Preston would have me recommitted before I could fight it. So Linda filed for something else first, a restraining order based on a pattern of psychological abuse and unlawful confinement. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Preston had no idea it was happening. I told him I had a doctor's appointment. Instead, I went to the courthouse with Linda. In that hearing, Linda presented all the evidence. The emails showing Preston had planned my commitment. Dr. Alvarez's evaluation stating I had no mental illness. Shanice's testimony about what she'd observed at Riverside. The recordings of Preston threatening to have me recommitted. My testimony about the 2 years of gaslighting and psychological abuse. Preston wasn't there to defend himself because he didn't know about the hearing. By the time he found out, it was over. The judge granted the restraining order. Preston was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from me. He was prohibited from contacting me except through attorneys. And critically, the judge included a provision that Preston could not petition for my psychiatric commitment while the restraining order was in effect. That afternoon, while Preston was at work, I moved out of our house with the help of Teresa and 2 sheriff's deputies. I took my clothes, my documents, and nothing else. I didn't want his money or his things. I just wanted out. I moved into a women's shelter temporarily. It was the safest place for me while the divorce proceedings played out. Preston's response was immediate and vicious. He filed a counter-motion claiming I was mentally unstable, that I'd manipulated the court, that I was a danger to myself. His attorneys argued that the restraining order should be lifted because I clearly needed his care and supervision. But we had evidence. So much evidence. And more importantly, we now had Dr. Alvarez's evaluation on record stating I had no mental illness. The battle that followed was brutal. The divorce trial lasted 3 weeks. It was one of the most difficult experiences of my life, but also one of the most validating. Preston's legal strategy was to paint me as mentally ill and to claim that everything he'd done had been out of concern for my welfare. His attorneys called Dr. Morrison to testify about my adjustment disorder diagnosis. They brought in Preston's parents to testify about my erratic behavior at family dinners. They even tried to bring in staff from Riverside to testify about my hospitalization. But Linda was prepared. She systematically dismantled every piece of their case. When Dr. Morrison testified, Linda cross-examined him about the emails Preston had sent before my first appointment. Dr. Morrison, isn't it true that Preston Whitmore contacted you before his wife ever became your patient? Yes. And isn't it true that he provided you with information about her supposed mental health issues before you'd ever evaluated her? He expressed concerns, yes. Concerns that influenced your diagnosis? I took his information into account, but I formed my own clinical opinion. Based on what? 3 sessions where she insisted she was fine, which you interpreted as lack of insight. Linda brought in Dr. Alvarez to testify. Dr. Alvarez explained in clear professional terms that I showed no signs of mental illness, that the medications I'd been prescribed were inappropriate, that my behavior during hospitalization had been consistent with someone who was rightfully distressed about being wrongfully committed, not someone with psychosis or delusions. Linda played the recordings of Preston threatening to have me recommitted. The courtroom was silent as everyone listened to Preston's cold, calculating voice saying, "If you don't do what I say, you'll be back in Riverside. And next time, I'll make sure you stay there." Shanice testified about what she'd observed at Riverside. In my 15 years as a psychiatric nurse, I've seen thousands of patients. Mrs. Whitmore did not present like someone with severe mental illness. She presented like someone who was terrified and trapped. When she told me her story, it was coherent, detailed, and consistent. I believed her then, and I believe her now. Linda presented the timeline of emails showing Preston had planned the commitment months in advance. She showed the court his email to his lawyer asking about the process. She showed his emails to his parents building a narrative of my instability. She showed his emails to Dr. Morrison priming him to see me as mentally ill before I ever walked into his office. And she presented evidence of the affair. While Preston having an affair wasn't directly relevant to the question of whether he'd abused me, it provided motive. He'd wanted to be with Valerie. I was in the way. Having me declared incompetent and institutionalized was his solution. When I testified, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I had to describe in detail the gaslighting, the isolation, the manipulation. I had to relive the trauma of being committed. I had to explain how being in Riverside had made me feel. The terror, the helplessness, the way every attempt to advocate for myself was used as proof I was delusional. Preston's attorneys tried to break me on cross-examination. They asked invasive questions. They tried to make me seem emotional and unstable. They implied I was lying, that I was vindictive, that I was making false accusations against a man who'd only tried to help me. But I stayed calm. I answered every question truthfully. And I think my composure actually helped my case. Because I didn't look like someone who was mentally ill. I looked like someone who'd survived something terrible and was telling the truth about it. Preston also testified. And this is where things got interesting. Under Linda's cross-examination, Preston started to crack. He got defensive. He got angry. He said things that revealed his true feelings. "Your Honor, my wife needed help. She was becoming impossible to manage. She questioned everything I did. She didn't respect my authority as her husband. Something had to be done. Impossible to manage, Linda repeated. She's not a child or an animal, Mr. Whitmore. She's your wife. Why would you need to manage her? That's not what I meant. You said something had to be done. What did you mean by that? I meant she needed treatment. Treatment she didn't need, according to Dr. Alvarez? Dr. Morrison diagnosed her. After you'd primed him with false information about her mental health history? It went on like that. And with each question, Preston revealed more of his controlling nature. He couldn't help himself. He was so used to being in control, so used to his word being law, that being challenged in court made him show his true colors. The judge, Judge Catherine Reynolds, watched all of this with an increasingly stern expression. When the trial concluded, Judge Reynolds took 2 days to deliberate. When she came back with her decision, her face was grave. I've presided over many difficult cases in my career, she said. But this case is particularly disturbing. Mr. Whitmore, you weaponized the psychiatric system to control your wife. You manipulated medical professionals, family members, and initially, even this court. You had your wife involuntarily committed not because she was mentally ill, but because she was becoming too independent for your liking. This is one of the most egregious forms of domestic abuse I've ever encountered. She paused, looking directly at Preston with obvious disgust. The evidence is overwhelming that Mrs. Whitmore was not mentally ill, that her commitment was based on false information you provided, and that you used the threat of recommitment to control her even after her release. This court finds that you engaged in a pattern of psychological abuse, false imprisonment, and what can only be described as institutional abuse. Judge Reynolds granted the divorce immediately. She also ordered Preston to pay my attorney fees, my therapy costs, and damages for the emotional distress he'd caused. She awarded me a significant portion of our marital assets and extended the restraining order indefinitely. But more importantly, she included a statement in her ruling that would become part of the public record. The court finds that Mr. Whitmore deliberately and maliciously caused his wife to be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital through false statements and manipulation of medical professionals. This constitutes a form of false imprisonment and psychological abuse. The court recommends that the South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners review Dr. Richard Morrison's conduct in this case, as he appears to have allowed himself to be used as a tool of domestic abuse. When the ruling was read, I started crying. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief, of validation, of freedom. Preston's face was red with rage. As we left the courtroom, he tried to approach me, but the bailiffs blocked him. "This isn't over," he said. "I'll appeal. I'll fight this." "Mr. Whitmore, you're in violation of the restraining order," one of the bailiffs said. "Step back or you'll be arrested." Preston stepped back, but his eyes were full of hate. Linda put her hand on my shoulder. "It's over," she said. "You're free." The months after the divorce were strange. I was free, but I was also traumatized. Being involuntarily hospitalized leaves scars that aren't visible. I had nightmares about being back in Riverside. I had panic attacks when I saw police officers or anyone in medical scrubs. I was hypervigilant, always waiting for someone to tell me I was crazy, always afraid that someone would try to take my freedom away again. I started seeing a trauma therapist, Dr. Monica Fields, who specialized in victims of psychological abuse. She helped me understand what had happened to me and start processing it. "What Preston did to you is called institutional abuse or medical abuse," Dr. Fields explained. "It's when someone uses medical or psychiatric systems as a tool of control. It's particularly insidious because it makes the victim doubt their own sanity. And it's hard to escape because the very act of trying to defend yourself can be used as evidence that you're unstable." "Why did everyone believe him?" I asked. "Why didn't anyone see through it?" "Because men like Preston are very skilled manipulators. They're charming, credible, respected. They know how to play the role of concerned husband. And they target women who are vulnerable, women without strong support systems, women who've been isolated, women from backgrounds that make them doubt themselves." That last part hit home. Preston had chosen me specifically because I was young, from a working-class background, without many resources or connections. He'd known I'd be easy to isolate and control. Dr. Fields also helped me understand the role my family background had played. You were raised in an environment where you learned that women should be grateful for men who provide for them. That women should be small, accommodating, not make waves. Preston exploited that. He knew you'd been conditioned to doubt yourself and defer to male authority. Working through all of this was hard. But it was also necessary. I also reconnected with my mom. Our relationship had been strained during my marriage because Preston had convinced me she was toxic. But when she heard what he'd done to me, she drove to Charleston immediately. "Baby, I'm so sorry," she said, hugging me tight. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I should have pushed harder. I should have. "It's not your fault, Mom. He isolated me from everyone. That's what abusers do." My mom and I talked for hours. She told me she tried to reach out during my marriage, but Preston had always made excuses for why I couldn't see her or talk to her. She told me she'd been worried but hadn't known how to help. "I don't want you to end up like me," she said. "Staying with Frank all these years even though he's not good to me. I taught you the wrong things, baby. I taught you to be grateful for any man who'd have you. I taught you to be small. And I'm sorry. It's not too late for you either, Mom," I said gently. She smiled sadly. "Maybe not. But right now, I'm here for you. Whatever you need." Having my mom's support meant everything. I also testified to the South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners about Dr. Morrison. Thanks to Judge Reynolds' recommendation, they opened an investigation. While I don't know all the details of what happened, I do know that Dr. Morrison was reprimanded and required to complete additional training on recognizing domestic abuse. It wasn't much, but it was something. Shanice and I stayed in touch. She became a friend, someone who understood what I'd been through in a way most people couldn't. She told me she was using my case as an example in trainings for psychiatric nurses about how to recognize when the psychiatric system is being weaponized. "You've helped other people by speaking up," she told me. "There are going to be other women who get believed because of what you survived and how you fought back." 6 months after the divorce, I started rebuilding my life in practical ways. I got a job as a marketing coordinator at a non-profit that worked with domestic violence survivors. It felt meaningful to use my experience to help others. I moved into a small apartment in West Ashley. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture I bought, every decoration I chose, every decision I made was mine alone. That freedom was intoxicating. I also started speaking publicly about what happened to me. I did an interview with a local news station about institutional abuse. I spoke at a domestic violence conference about how abusers weaponize the mental health system. I connected with a national organization that advocates for people who've been wrongfully committed. The more I spoke up, the more I heard from other women who'd experienced similar things. Women whose husbands had threatened to have them committed. Women who'd been gaslit about their mental health. Women who'd been medicated unnecessarily. Women who'd been hospitalized as a form of control. It was horrifying to realize how common this was. But it was also validating to know I wasn't alone. I also filed a civil lawsuit against Preston for emotional distress and false imprisonment. My attorney said we had a strong case given Judge Reynolds' findings. Preston settled out of court for a significant amount, probably because he didn't want more public exposure of what he'd done. That money allowed me to finish my college degree, something I'd abandoned when I married Preston. At 28, I went back to school part-time while working. It felt amazing to be investing in myself again. I started dating again too, though very cautiously. I went out with a few guys, but I was hyper-vigilant about red flags. Any sign of controlling behavior, any attempt to isolate me, any gaslighting, and I was out immediately. Then I met Marcus. He was a social worker who volunteered at the domestic violence non-profit where I worked. He was kind, patient, and respectful of my boundaries. When I told him about my past, about what Preston had done, He didn't treat me like I was damaged. He treated me like I was a survivor. That took incredible strength, he said. To fight back against someone who had that much power over you. I'm in awe of you. We took things slow. Very slow. But it felt right. It felt safe. It felt like being with someone who actually saw me as an equal partner, not a possession to be controlled. Now, at 28, I'm in a completely different place than I was 3 years ago. I have my own apartment. I have a job I love. I have my education. I have friends and family who support me. I have a healthy relationship with someone who respects me. And most importantly, I have my freedom and my sanity. The trauma of what Preston did will always be with me. There are still moments when someone questions my memory or perception and I feel that spike of fear. What if they think I'm crazy? What if they don't believe me? But I'm learning to trust myself again. To trust my own mind. To trust that I know my own reality. To anyone listening to this who's being gaslit or manipulated or told they're mentally ill when they know they're not, please trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Reach out for help. There are people who will believe you. And if someone is threatening to have you committed, or has had you committed, know that you can fight back. It's hard. It's scary. The psychiatric system is easy to weaponize and hard to challenge. But it is possible. What Preston did to me was cruel and calculated. He used his money, his family connections, his credibility, and the psychiatric system to control me. He found doctors who would go along with his narrative. He isolated me from anyone who might question him. He built a case over 2 years to make my commitment seem justified. But he underestimated my strength. He thought that having me hospitalized would break me completely. That I'd come out so traumatized and discredited that I'd never fight back. He thought wrong. I survived Riverside. I survived being told I was crazy when I knew I wasn't. I survived being medicated unnecessarily. I survived the humiliation of having my sanity questioned. I survived being controlled through the threat of recommitment. And then I gathered evidence, found allies, hired a lawyer, and fought back. And I won. Not everyone in my situation has the resources I had. Not everyone has access to a lawyer like Linda or a psychiatrist like Dr. Alvarez or a nurse like Shanice. The psychiatric system is still too easy to weaponize, and there aren't enough safeguards to protect people from being wrongfully committed by abusive partners. But change is happening. Slowly. Cases like mine are raising awareness. Medical professionals are being trained to recognize when they're being manipulated. Laws are being proposed to add more oversight to involuntary commitment proceedings. I hope that by telling my story, I can contribute to that change. I hope that no other woman has to experience what I experienced. But if someone is experiencing it right now, I hope they know they're not alone. I hope they know they can fight back. I hope they know that being gaslit doesn't make you crazy, it makes you a victim of abuse. And most importantly, I hope they know that you can survive this. You can escape. You can rebuild. You can reclaim your sanity, your freedom, and your life. My name is Alexandra Bennett. I'm 28 years old. My ex-husband had me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital because I was becoming too independent. He gaslit me for 2 years, manipulated doctors and family, and used the psychiatric system as a weapon against me. But I survived. I gathered evidence. I found allies. I fought back in court. And I won my freedom. If you're in a relationship where someone is telling you you're crazy, making you doubt your own memory, threatening to have you committed, or has had you committed, please know that you deserve to be believed. You deserve freedom. You deserve to trust your own mind. Don't let anyone steal your sanity. Fight back. Document everything. Find help. You are stronger than you know. And to anyone who works in the psychiatric or medical field, please be aware that your systems can be weaponized by abusers. Please ask questions. Please look beyond the concerned spouse's narrative. Please believe patients when they tell you they're being abused. Because institutional abuse is real. And it destroys lives. But survivors can rebuild. I'm living proof of that.